Well, Omitofa. So nice to see everybody here and everyone throughout Zoom land and throughout the universe. This is such a privilege for me and for all, I guess, for all of us to share the Dharma like this. Things couldn't be better, right, at the moment. They could get worse, but they're wonderful right now. So I'm here and I have my assistant, you may recognize, this is my chief disciple, Zag, wave, who helped drive me here. No, okay. I can only get so far with that, but he may come in later in the talk when either I fall asleep or he falls asleep. I can never quite tell. Is that okay? Okay. All right. So this is my 7th Lojong talk. And this is going to be the subject, discipline of relationships. And in preparing for the talk, I've consulted with, of course, all my teachings that I've gotten from Master Sheng Yen and from some Tibetan masters, Pema Chodron, Norm Fisher, Khenpo Lodro Taye, Charla Kyoban, and American master Tom Campbell. All of these people, these great masters have helped me understand this wonderful discipline of Lojong. And what I do when I do these talks is I give all of these different points of view about the teachings. And I find that helpful for myself and hopefully helpful for you, because it's very easy for you to just hear a slogan or hear any kind of teaching, whether it's from Chinese or Japanese or American Buddhist, and sort of have it go in one ear and out the other, right? So I'm very aware that I have a lot of buzzwords in my head, and the question for me is, have they entered my heart? So that's part of the reason I'm doing these talks, is to really examine how I'm practicing and perhaps to share this with you, and so you can sort of turn the light inward and see what you think. So Lojong is about the realities of having a practice in everyday life. And I'm very concerned, of course, that what I'm talking about is perfectly in sync and perfectly relevant to Chan, which I believe it is, and everyone will make their own decision about that. So in this section, there are 16 slogans, but I'm hopefully going to get through 4 of them. And so what I want to do is give a short review of where we've gotten so far, so you can see how the Lojong actually works. And there are 7 points to practice. When I first started studying it, I read Norm Fisher's book, Training in Compassion, and that gives all 59 slogans. And I kind of ignored these big rubrics of the 7 points, but they're very, very important to show the sequential nature of the teacher, and also to help us to look inside ourselves to see what's going on, to put it simply. So here's a short review of everything we've done so far. So the first point in the training is to train in the preliminaries. And I'll be going over this in more detail, but in a word, it's to recognize your predicament as a human being and your opportunity as a human being. That's the first point, sort of assessing your situation. Point 2 is to train in bodhicitta, right? Our awakened nature, the awakened mind. And that's divided into 2 parts. The absolute bodhicitta, which is really about very serious meditation practice, of looking at the world, everything as a dream, examining unborn awareness, right? Asking who's doing this, how is this all happening? Also, not getting caught in antidotes, so you are not caught up in slogans and practice in attainment, That's what we'll be talking about a lot today. And then resting in alaya consciousness, and all the things that I just talked about really cover, in a way, what we do in Chan practice of Huato, of silent illumination, and following the breath, reciting Buddha's name. They all can fit in here. And then, of course, number 6, which I've always loved, is off the cushion, be a child of illusion, right? So what's happening is that the absolute bodhicitta, our perfectly awakened mind, and relative bodhicitta, which is our awareness of samsara with a compassionate heart, they're being combined. And that's what happens in the Tonglen practice of giving and receiving in the world, taking in suffering, and then letting out your true Buddha nature, your awakened mind. And this is a summary, right? So I'm going very fast through it. And then part 3 was about transforming bad circumstances into the path of enlightenment. And this is really just about working with the 4 noble truths. And we can see that we have karmic choice in everything that we do, and that we are part of causes and conditions. Usually we think of causes and conditions, the world is out there and it's just causing us to suffer, right? I'm perfectly innocent, I'm a wonderful person, and everybody's just giving me a hard time, and I wish they would stop. That's reminds me of this story of someone who was meditating in Colorado, and planes kept flying over the Zen center. So they asked the teacher to contact the Air Force Base to stop the planes from flying, right? It didn't work, as far as I know. So we're really looking into that, and rather than resisting what's happening in the moment, we're opening to it and working with it. And then part 4 is showing the utilization of practice in one's whole life. And this is something that's really emphasized in Chan. I remember once when I was a Dharma teacher in training, this is a long time ago, Guagu looked at all this and said, you know, you guys, you look at Chan like it's a hobby. I took that to heart, and I thought, you know, actually Chan is really a very good hobby, but it just can't stay one. Right? There's all sorts of paths that bring us into the practice. But at some point, if you really want to make progress, you have to get really serious about what you're doing and really look at it. And the big thing, of course, is to not fool yourself, which is, I think I have a PhD in not fooling myself, right? Which trying to get rid of that. So that's part 4, showing the utilization of practice in one's life. And part 5 is evaluate. Oh, and the other thing about that, the utilization of practice in its whole life, it's talking about practicing for life and for death, which is perfectly accommodating to Chan practice, where we, like Shunryu Suzuki said, that life and death are just a swinging door. You know, there's no separation, right? This is also very counterintuitive to the way that we encounter the world. What I did last time was called evaluating your mind training, which is to expand and extend in some other translation. That's understanding how you are in the path and how the path is in you. And there are a number of slogans that I talked about last time. Now we are entering part 6, the discipline of relationships. Sometimes translated as the commitment of mind training or the discipline of mind training. So in this, we're really now sort of looking out into the world, how we interact with everyone around us, which includes ourselves, in a way. And so then we can learn about compassion for others and for ourselves. And this is a central theme in Lojong, the compassion. This is why I first came to study the Lojong, because I was wondering where the compassion was in my life, because I was just so filled with practicing it and trying to get rid of my own problems and hoping for the great solution, which I sometimes characterize it as win the lottery, Chan, which is you keep, I'm going to retreats, I'm reading things, and I figure that's good. I'm really doing something. And one day, I'm going to get a call, right? Oh, you've reached highest perfect enlightenment. Congratulations. And it just doesn't work that way. Right? But, and I think that that attitude that I just enunciated is something in the back of people's minds. As a matter of fact, I was just recently in Taiwan and I gave a presentation there to the monks and nuns. And after I gave my presentation, I spoke to a whole group of monks and nuns, and I asked them, I said, honestly, how many times do you go into a retreat, where this attitude is like, this is going to be it, right? I'm going to this retreat and I'm really going to have my breakthrough right now. And that kind of attitude is just an attachment. It's not that you won't have a breakthrough, but, this is pointing to all the things that we attach to, we keep in our minds, and they're sort of in the subconscious. They're in the wallpaper of our minds. So we see it, but we don't see it. So in learning about our interaction with others, we begin, at the beginning of, how we developed our human responses even as we were infants. And we can overcome, a lot of the things that we have internalized, our habitual tendencies. And another general comment about all of the Lojong slogans, very important, is that they have many different levels. Each phrase, it's almost like Indra's net. Any particular slogan in Lojong contains all the others. And there are many levels where you first hear it and it just sounds like a good advice. Like, do unto others as you would have others do unto you. And you listen to it, you hear it, but then you can kind of forget it. But these slogans are really about maintaining our practice. The way that a sheepdog, gathers the sheep around, make sure nobody gets out of the herd, so they all pile in where they're supposed to be. That's one way I just thought of, that you could look at the Lojong's slogans. And so inside these slogans, there is true emptiness. There is the absolute. There is realization within these slogans. But of course, what we're talking about today is really the surface. So it's kind of a teaser, of what our potential could be, what's really inside us, who we really are, our true Buddha nature. So I'm going to start with the first slogan which happens to be number 23, but it could be number 1, right? It could be number 59. But what this is, it's always follow 3 basic principles, which are dedication to practice, refraining from outrageous conduct, and developing patience. So with the first one, which I said with dedication to practice, another way this is translating is renewing your commitments and vows. And this, I think, is really, really important. And it's something that when I examine my own practice, I realize, how lacking I am in certain ways. So sometimes I give the example of anyone who's studied Chan for any time has heard the phrase, dwell nowhere and this mind will arise, right, from the Diamond Sutra. And that phrase is about non-attachment, non-identification, having a free, clear mind. And I can say that phrase really easily, dwell nowhere and this mind will arise. Doesn't mean that I'm living that way. So what the vows are about are keeping us, like that sheepdog I mentioned, keeping us in line. So Master Sheng Yen said, and this is not an exact quote, but it's the spirit of what he said, which is, the universe may disappear, but my vows are endless. And I always found that really inspiring. And so one of the things I want to talk about are the 4 great vows. This is not exactly Lojong, but of course it also is, because what Lojong is pointing at is our true nature. Now, 4 great vows is another great example of things that we say all the time. But how do we understand them? What do we really think we're doing when we say the 4 great vows? So there's 2 different ways that I'm going to talk about that we can look at the vows. There is the time-oriented way, right, which is the first thing that hits your brain when you hear it. I vow to deliver innumerable sentient beings. Okay, well, do I have till next Thursday? I mean, when am I supposed to do this? How many beings am I supposed to save in a given day? Now, that's not the spirit of this vow, of course, but it's a natural thing because it's very hard to understand. It doesn't have to do with time, and it doesn't really have to do with quantity, but we can get caught up in that. And of course, Master Sheng Yen talked about vows as vows were made to be broken. Not that you're deliberately trying to ignore the vow, but the vow tests your resilience. It tests your resolve. So when you make a vow, you are doing the best you can. And generally speaking, the best that we can do, well, is perfect in a moment, but things keep changing and we may just backslide, fall off the wagon, so to speak. So the vows are there to catch us when we fall, if you will. And they're guidelines and commitments as well. And they help us navigate, the changing times, changing situations. So a much better way to look at the 4 great vows is to see that they are operative and accomplishable in this moment, right now. Right now at 11:18 in the morning, you can be actually doing the great vows if you have a different understanding. So let's talk about saving all sentient beings. What that means right now is that you can be aware of your attachment to self and the fact that there are other beings outside of you, which is something I've always tried to deny, but it seems to be true. The world doesn't revolve around me. So Hui Neng was asked, how can you legitimately, vow to save all sentient beings? How can you do this? And what he said fairly simply is, you are saving them in your own mind. And that isn't just getting some concept. It's quite the opposite. It's reorienting the way that your mind works, the way that your mind interacts with the world. And so this is the bodhicitta itself that we're cultivating, absolute and relative. And it's developing our own wisdom and compassion and our determination to practice in the world as best we can. So even this vow, which seems so incomprehensible, really has a down-to-earth way of looking at it in the moment. And so the next vow, cut off all vexations. So if you think about it, at this moment, we are in the grip of greed, hatred, and ignorance. We don't really feel that way, but if someone's playing some music that I don't like, or I'm attracted by an item or a person or something, all this stuff might arise in me, all of the poisons, greed, hatred, and ignorance. But in vowing to cut off endless vexations, I can look at that in this moment and do the best I can to cut off that train of thought. And Wu Men, from the Wu Men Guan, he has this great phrase. He says to cut off the mind road. And that mind road, of course, is the mind road of samsara, the mind road of gain and loss, not being tripped up by the 8 winds of gain and loss, pain and pleasure, fame and ill repute, and praise and blame. To cut through that. And then master limitless approaches to Dharma. Well, that sounds like you have to become a Tripitaka master. But another way of looking at it is that you can learn from every situation in every moment, right? It doesn't have to be this thing that is just as incomprehensible, like you have to read 10,000 books. But of course, learning the Dharma is important. And then last, attaining supreme Buddhahood. Well, that's probably the most challenging of the 4 vows. What does that mean? We're not Buddhas. We don't know what it is. It's like somebody can say, why don't you go to France and you can look at pictures of it. You can't really look at pictures of how the Buddha sees the world. But you can recognize what that vow is talking about is to see who you really are, because our understanding in Chan and in many other of the Buddhist disciplines is that right now we are Buddhists at this moment. We just don't recognize it. I recognize it. So some of us do, right? But not all of us. Go back, okay? It's not right. This is, he has a mind of his own. So, and we can look at the 4 vows right now, the 4 noble truths. And the Buddha said, talking about causes and conditions and dependent origination, he who sees causes and conditions sees the Tathagata. So this is how these vows can really be very operative in our lives right now. And then I said that I would talk about the preliminaries, which is how the Lojong begins. And that's understanding the preciousness of human life, impermanence, the unsatisfactoriness of samsara, and the responsibility of karma, right? So obviously, unfortunately, there are people who don't think that life is precious. They don't think their lives are precious or other people's, but that's not who we are. We can try to see past that, even if we have those feelings. And impermanence, which is the simplest of the 3 marks of existence to talk to someone about, whether they're a Buddhist or not, if they're not interested. Almost everybody will sign off on, yes, flowers wilt, things change. But it's also one of the most difficult to see in every moment. So it's an important thing to keep in mind. And the unsatisfactoriness of samsara, a little tough, right? Because I think if I got a Lamborghini or I won the lottery, then all my problems would disappear. It's very seductive. But the teaching is that no material good, no award, no anything in samsara is going to solve the problems of life and death. And then the responsibility of karma, a lot of us don't like responsibility, but when you see that it's something that is available in every moment and that it can be beneficial to you and other people, it's a good way of waking up in a certain sense. So we begin with that foundation. That's the vows. So now a little bit more comments about the vows from various of these teachers that I mentioned. So we want to renew our commitments. This is useful for anyone, any spiritual discipline. And we also recognize that spiritual commitment is a private matter. Norm Fisher says that. So we lose our focus on how we're interacting with other people, right? Nobody can see into our minds, although we can feel guilty all the time about what we're thinking, but nobody else can really see that. And so we tend to have a closed kind of idea of how we're interacting with the world. And as Norman Fisher says, there's no distraction like a human relationship. So remember, everything I'm talking about today is about interacting with the world, with human relationships. And so, and then we can look and see if our training, if our practice is going correctly. And we understand that vows and commitment are protection for us and for others. Actually, one thing, Brad Warner, a Zen teacher, talks about the first noble vow, and he says, I vow to deliver sentient beings from me, right? He recognizes his, the destructive nature that might come about because of poisons arising in the mind. And so you really, can take this commitment seriously and try to resist the seductions of the world, and you can see how we are bound to words, which is really interesting when you talk about vows, because a vow is something that you articulate, something that you speak about. And, we have this phrase, lip service, right? You want to give lip service to something. And then from, in Hamlet, Claudius, the king, who actually killed his own brother, tries to pray, and he says, my words fly up to heaven, my thoughts remain below. Words without thoughts never to heaven go. In other words, the concepts alone will not do much of anything. And Pema Chodron reminds us about our bodhisattva vows. And also she uses this phrase, which can sound trite, but it's something to really consider seriously, of making friends with yourself. I read recently a quote from this novelist, Anthony Powell, that self-love is so often unrequited, right? We can't give back love to ourselves. So the idea of really accepting who we are, even in a samsaric way, because that's what we're working with, is really important. And another thing about vows, once again, for us middle-class Americans, I'm not sure about what this is like for people in other cultures, but we don't like vows. I mean, we think that, a vow is giving our own responsibility, our autonomy. We're abandoning it. We're relinquishing it to some other force. So we're sort of wary about it. And, in the back of our minds, if I vow for something, am I going to become some sort of a zombie? But the vow is really about leaving zombiehood. There's such a word. And it's really not only just in our true self-interest, but in everybody else's self-interest. And what a vow is a method of cultivating wholesome states of mind. So really important. And it's an exercise in clarity of mind. That to me is one of the great goals of all our practice, is to see clarity of mind, seeing the world as it is and not fabricating things that we'd like to see or denying things that we don't like to see. And then with this, we can deal with our addictions, our habitual tendencies, so that we can abandon the clinging that we do. On some level, we have to take these things slowly. So when we get rid of the clinging impulse, we won't have another clinging impulse and another clinging impulse. And then we would start to uncling, which might lead to more unclinging. And then we're following the path a little more closely. And another very important thing about vows is they're not just prohibitive, right? So there is the vow which is a precept, of course, of not killing. So at this moment, I'm not killing anything, right? Right. This, by the way, he's still alive, even though he looks like he's non-sentient. Just want you to know that. So does that make me a great practitioner? I'm not killing anything. So we have to see this proactive nature of the vows. So it's not just about not doing things, and of course I'm talking about precepts now, but also it's about being affirmative, about nurturing, about being supportive, embracing life and everything in it. So we can nurture other people's sense of curiosity, and help other people let go of their attachment. And this is a phrase from Tom Campbell. We don't show off, we show reality. And so then I was just really thinking about this. So what's the opposite of a vow? It's an interesting question. So what I came up, and you may have your own answers, but one way of looking at what the opposite of a vow is inattention, relying on conceptual frameworks, empty words, not empty in the Buddhist sense, empty in the meaningless sense, baseless assumptions, lack of clarity, and ignorance. That's the opposite of a vow. And I thought in my own practice, I have good sits, I have bad sits, but what can be through going in all of these kind of situations is the vow that I'm practicing. So it's a very good way to have a steady practice and not be shaken by circumstances as much as we usually are. Of course, we'll be shaken by circumstances, but we have some ability to control that, how we react. And also by taking vows, you can recognize if you're squandering your time, and you can really put your energy behind your practice. And part of the vow is whatever happens in daily life, I will use my practice. Lojong, sun illumination, Watto, whatever I'm doing, it's always operative. I'm sure for many teachers would emphasize continuous practice, and this is one way of helping, right? So the second of, we're still on, that was 23A, and now we're on 23B, which is do nothing outrageous. So this also we can look into very deeply. What does this really mean? So Norm Fisher talks about don't do anything that's socially unacceptable, anything that's hurtful, trying to bring attention to ourselves. And we can avoid holier than thou attitudes, which is really easy to fall in, especially if you've come off your first retreats or even later, and you're feeling very centered, and you're looking at people who are caught up in one thing or another, and you can think to yourself, oh, that sentient being, boy, they're really just off the track. They're just not doing as well as I am. And of course, you could take that one step further, which is worse, and sort of express that to someone, which is going to make the situation a lot worse. And you can look, as Pema Chodron points out, you can look into the deeper problems of isolation, hatred, and aggression that might be causing these things to happen. And through all of the slogans, causality is really important, how one thing leads to another, how things are connected. And so another thing we can get into is the hero-victim kind of trope, that's how we're looking at the world. I could be the hero or I could be the victim in certain circumstances, but both of that kind of relationship, narrowly defined relationship, is not helpful. And just building yourself up. They say sometimes that if you want knowledge, learn something every day, and if you want wisdom, unlearn something every day. So that's also behind this nothing outrageous. And not to let our conduct become confused. And when it's confused, then we might do things that we wish we hadn't. And, to show off your supposed realization, that's a warning you get right from the get-go, because there are people who have pretty vivid experiences in their meditation, and they say, I must be enlightened. And they really act like that. And they could be way, way off and can get into a lot of trouble that way. Another thing, this is called Capcom says, relinquish your personal drama. And I'm just throwing that out as an interesting phrase to think about. Right, that we have this personal drama. We're kind of our own soap operas in a way. And, and like I said, a lot of what's so wonderful about the Lojong phrases, in my opinion, is that they're bringing out these things that are just hiding in our subconscious, that are operative, sometimes really strongly operative, but we're just not noticing it. So personal drama is very interesting. There's another point that Kaplan brings up. No crazy austerity. Meditating, 5 hours a day or 6 hours a day. Sherfowitz talked about this. He had some students who were just practicing too much, and they were really stuck. And he says, don't let your practice become offensive to other people. And there actually is, in the Abhidharma, he points out, there's called the wrong view of moral discipline, of really being so engulfed in your practice that you lose your perspective. And once again, the flip side of no outrageous conduct is to turn your attention to other people and to make them shine, to be supportive of them. Okay, so the third, this is number 23C, is patience. And that's also translated from the Sanskrit and the Tibetan as don't be one-sided. So Norm Fisher says there's always another side of a story. And we can notice our preferencing, things we like and we don't like. This is so pervasive in our everyday experience. You just walk down the street. You might like the way the street looks. You may not like it. And of course, you can be neutral about it, which is a particular state of mind. And as Pema points out about patience, it's non-aggression. It's an encouragement to wait, like counting to 10. And it's about not being biased and to practice in adversity and happiness, no matter how you feel, tired or well rested. And when I read that, this was Khentrul Lodro Taye, and I thought, in my own practice, there are times when I'm really tired. Well, I do practice every day, but sometimes I don't do it quite as much as I could, and I sort of give myself a break, which one should do, by the way. But to have this ongoing thing to do the best that you can is really a good attitude. And this, of course, opens up the doorway for our understanding one of the 6 paramitas, Kshanti, the paramita of patience. And one thing to understand about that the idea of patience is almost 180 degrees opposite from the Western idea of what patience is, which is to grin and bear it, to suppress your desires, suppress your anxiousness, suppress your expectations. It's really about looking at it, living with it, and recognizing what is appropriate in a given situation right now, what will actually be useful, as opposed to what you're chomping at the bit to get. And of course, a lot of these teachers talk about Tonglen, this practice of giving and receiving with the world, which I've thought about it, and I'm really interested in how all of this integrates into our Chan practice. This is really not so far from using metta, which many of the teachers in the Chan school do use. So we're really recognizing other people's suffering, and we're wishing them the best in all the different ways that we can, with compassion, if they're suffering, with joy, if they're experiencing joy, and generally with equanimity, so that we are not being biased. That equanimity is very much a part of this particular slogan. And so from Trala Kablan, I love this expression. Tibetans often say that when their stomach is full and the sun is warm, everyone seems capable of heroic deeds. Right? So when you're just feeling so good, sure, nothing I can't do. It's when you're not feeling that way that that the rubber hits the road, so to speak. So we can really do what we can to experience the moment as it's actually transpiring. If that's part of the vow, part of the remember the slogans, I've mentioned this before, but the English word slogan has a derivation from Scottish, and it means war cry. Of course, things go better with Coke is a slogan, but I wouldn't call it a war cry. But slogan is a funny word. They're much more serious than just slogans. These are deep understandings that are really to our benefit to take heed to them. So we finished number 23, right? Vows, doing nothing outrageous, and having patience. Now it's number 24, which is the traditional way of explaining this is change your intention, but act naturally. Norm Fisher translates this as don't be a phony. So you have a perceived attainment or pursuit of attainment, and you let that go to your head. We talked about that a little bit before. So you're moving away from being stuck in a particular area, and you have some sense of relief, some sense of understanding. But then what happens is you can get caught on that, and you think you're a big shot spiritual dude, which I don't think is Sanskrit, but you get the picture. You're really you think you're quite wonderful, and you start walking around like you're really an important person. And what this slogan is talking about, I got this from Tom Campbell, is really about realization. And if you think about it, from what we know about realization, once again, when I talk about realization, I'm talking about what I've heard. But you are in a state where you are not affected by what's going on in the usual way, but you are very aware of what's going on in the world, or everything that's happening in samsara. So this idea of don't be a phony, to change your intention to be a vow-oriented intention, but act naturally, is really about realization at the bottom. Remember, as I said, all the Lojong statements they actually have 4 levels. The prohibitive, which is, don't do this. The affirmative, make things embracing and supportive. There's also the absolute or the empty, where you see the connectedness of everything, and the lack of self-nature in everything. And the last is the karmic nature, where you're actually seeing how everything is affected in the world. So one thing this slogan can help with is backsliding. Not that we want to talk about things in terms of moving backwards or moving forwards, because one of my favorite things from the sutra is about a deva that asked the Buddha, how did you withstand the storm? And the storm means the suffering of the world, all of your vexations. How did you do that? And the Buddha said, I found that when I moved forward, I got blown away. And when I stayed in place, I sunk down. So the Buddha said, I neither moved forward or backward, nor did I sink down. And of course, that leaves our conceptual minds sort of floundering on the beach because there's nowhere to go. It's a little bit like when Inspector Clouseau says, this is in the Pink Panther movies, there's a time to act and there's a time not to act. And this is not one of those situations. That's funny. Whereas the anecdote of the Buddha and the Deva is really something to contemplate. And also in this slogan, inattention is a serious risk. Drifting off. I mean, we can give ourselves a break, but the more we're aware, the more we're on the path. And we can have this attitude. This is a pernicious attitude, very easy to fall into. Yeah, I've heard that before. Four Noble Truths, suffering. Yeah, I got it. I've been there, done that. What's next? Give me something that's going to perk me up, something interesting. Right. That kind of attitude one can fall into. Another mistake that people can make is this idea of being natural. People can think that it's being indulgent, so, I like my poisons. Actually, Pema Chodron talks about nostalgia for samsara. There's a phrase for you, Things were so wonderful 5 years ago when I was really miserable. But, I was, I'm comfortable with that right now, but that's something that you can fall into. And, we can look at those kind of mistaken attitudes. So we're really looking to change our attitude, and one thing also about attitude and vows that I thought of is that actually in Vasubandhu's, 100 states of mind, there are these universal states of mind. And one of them is called deliberation or intentionality. So if you think about it, every moment of the day, every moment you are conscious or maybe unconscious, there's some intention in the mind. We're not always aware of it. So if that indeed is true, right, and you're supposed to see if these things really are true for you, right? If that's true, then it's not bad to really look at what intention we actually are holding on to. And that's, once again, where all of these slogans can come into play. So another thing is to be authentic. That's another way of understanding this. And so in changing your attitude, it's getting rid of a lot of your preconceptions, your reliance on the conceptual. And so what we're usually walking around with is what can be called the constructed self, right? We've got this image of who we are, of our personality, which could be, I'm a loser, I'm a genius, I know more than everybody else, I know less than everybody else, whatever it is. This is a construction, and it's like a factory. One of my teachers mentioned. So this factory keeps banging out desires and greed, hatred, and desire. But the authentic self, our Buddha nature, does not have a factory. So there's nothing being pushed out the door. There are no products to shore up our sense, our false sense of who we are. And so this Lojong, as all the other Lojong slogans are pointing to something very deep. And it takes a while in working with the slogans because they really sound good. I mean, to me, they sounded really good. I read them. I thought, wow, that's really interesting. That's really interesting. And I think that's a wonderful way to approach it. But then when you come back to them and you start to turn them around, you can see how useful they can be. And so another way of looking at the don't be a phony and be authentic, self, be natural, is something that Dogen Zenji talks about, of like milk and water, of blending in, harmonize with other sentient beings. Don't make yourself the important point. Don't raise yourself up and put down others. That's actually one of the Bodhisattva precepts. And so that actually could encourage us to be energetic and outgoing. And it requires virya, another one of these 6 paramitas, being energetic, being proactive. So this will change kind of the tenor of our lives, of our practice, when we have that kind of introspection. And the other thing that this works, the other way it works in terms of the positive, is nurturing other people's sense of self-worth, of nurturing other people's sense of competence, of really helping them to help themselves, which is an important understanding, right? Because even the Buddha couldn't enlighten someone else. The Buddha had to show them, well, first of all, in our practice, we're already enlightened, but we don't know it. But that's what the practice is about. It's about showing us who we are by letting us see who we are, by using all of these methods, slogans, meditation, our work with teachers, which is something I always want to emphasize also. It's really good if you can work with a teacher. And this is really talking about transformation. Transformation into who we already are, about working with non-poisons, with wholesomeness, taking thoughtlessness and turning it into wisdom, taking aversion and turning that into loving kindness, and taking our greed and turning it into generosity. And once again, as I said earlier, when we don't show off, we can show reality, which is non-greed. And yes, there is a lot of greed floating around in reality. It's just a question of how we field it, so to speak. We don't have to get so caught up in it. And we don't have to keep staying embroiled or laced with our poisons. And this is also part of our practice, is not simply to say, oh, they're poisons and they're bad, but to look at the roots. What is causing them to arise? What is the nature of a poison? Why is it so seductive? Why are some things so attractive, some things so off-putting? That's something we can really look into. So this affirmative cultivation of vows, of reality, is what's behind not acting outrageously as well. And once again, this takes some time. I think I've one last thing, or a few other things from Norm Fisher. So if you're going to revolutionize your life, please do, but don't impose some sort of regimen on yourself. Right. So one of the things, if you listen to all of these different comments about the slogans, you can see it's almost like balancing like a card, or something with a very small base. If it's a little bit to this way, it'll fall over that way. If you try to correct it and you put too much pressure, it will fall over this way. We're really talking about getting to the middle way. And all of these slogans are pointing to the various ways we can fall off the path or misconstrue things. And so we don't want to impose too much on ourselves. And actually, one of the things that Norm Fisher says, just lighten up, relax, go to a movie, have a glass of wine, he says, but I don't say that. Don't try so hard. Maybe there's something good on TV, right? When the time is right. It's in the book that I translated of Sherfu, the need to be gentle. He talks about seeing what the situation is around you, and when there is a time when you really can act, you really do. But then there are times when causes and conditions are not favorable, so you rest. You reserve your strength. So we really have to have a good sense of who we are and how we're progressing. One thing that Kentrell says, talks about being overly pious and like bursting out with Buddhist phrases in the middle of a conversation. May all sentient beings be happy. He uses it when you're talking about, ordering some food or, so just really watch how you're interacting with other people. And lastly, there's a phrase, a Tibetan phrase, it's talking about high Dharma, which is really sort of what we're talking about, really serious practice. Talking about high Dharma is easy. Applying the meaning to the mind stream is hard. Okay, and I guess the last thing with this slogan is just try to get along with people and yourself. Now, number 25. All right, we're getting got two more. Don't talk about injured limbs. So don't talk about others' faults. So Norm Fisher points out, stop talking about other people, gossiping. What do others say about us when we're not around? I don't want to think about that. Be the person who is consistently supportive. What do you do when someone is acting badly? Speaking badly doesn't help. That's injured limbs is the idea of something that's obvious. Someone has an obvious disability, and you don't want to make them feel bad about that. So we don't make fun of people with injuries. And you can respect the person behind it, behind the behavior that you don't like. And of course, there's the slogan number 12 in the Lojong, which is drive all blames into one. And that one is our sense of self, our attachment to self. And what this slogan also really comes down to is right speech. And, right speech is a whole Dharma talk in itself, but the idea of not lying, of course, would put people off on the wrong track and could hurt people greatly. Harsh words can hurt people directly. Divisive speech, is just the opposite of what we want to do. And even frivolous words, which, the word for that in Pali, one of my favorite words, is sampapalapavaka, is frivolous words can really be very pernicious. It's not just talking about nonsense here or there, but it's also about not attending to a situation which is serious. And understanding when speech is necessary. So one example is if you see a child cutting vegetables with a knife and they're doing it in the wrong way, you don't want to be quiet. You want to point out that the way they're doing it, they can cut themselves, and you can show them there's a better way to actually use a knife and a better way to cut the vegetables. So you're being proactive, not just, so once again, not talking about injured limbs is one thing, but also being supportive, helping people with their problems, with whether it's an injured limb or a personality, what seems to you to be a personality fault. So we try not to reduce things to just comments, right? About just dismissing somebody as a nasty person, a grouch. Very easy to do this. And so once again, this is pointing back to right speech. And on the more absolute level, which I think it's important to point out, though we may not be there, but is to see that in all of these situations, you and the situation are one. There's discrimination with wisdom, but there's no difference. Everything is connected. So I mean, if you weren't able to discriminate with wisdom, you couldn't help yourself or anyone else. You have to recognize what's going on. But you can look deeper and not hold on to this sense of I'm being wronged, or this is not according to the way that I'd like to see the world. And sometimes we hear these things and you have this thought, wait a second, I'm a lot smarter than that, right? I'm not going to be caught up in these things. And so that's yet another way that you can fool yourself. You can get caught up in your own ego. And one commented, one antidote for this slogan is non-stupidity. Be clear, right? And to recognize your negative views about others, and to realize that loving kindness, compassion are the antidotes. And just think about how we have this tendency to talk about the negative things about other people. And actually, I remember when I was working as a headhunter, I went to a conference for salespeople, and they had this statistic. I may have the numbers off, but it was something like if you go to a restaurant and you have a bad meal, you're 20 times more likely to tell someone about it than if you had a good meal. I don't know if that's true, but it's something to think about. We can often feel outraged. And then Shanti Deva says, thus, when enemies or friends are seen to act improperly, be calm and call to mind that everything arises from conditions. There's one of those phrases that's really easy to say, but we're talking about really seeing this stuff, really incorporating it in our lives. And, you have to really ask yourself, is that true? Right? We usually think, well, that's true for everybody else. It's not true for me, or whatever kind of strange take we have on some of these things. But these are all worthy of contemplation. And we recognize that we don't really know another's heart, another very true insight. I mean, we think we understand people, and we think we have the right to have opinions about them, even just to ourselves. And the author Anais Nin said, we don't see other people as they are. We see them as we are. So I think that's really true in many cases. But we can learn from all this, and we don't have to get down on ourselves for having these negative views. This is the path we're working on. And we can see the poisons working. One thing Pema Chodron often talks about, this is Tibetan practice, is exchanging yourself with another person. Imagine if you were in their shoes and they were in your shoes. How would you feel about seeing yourself arrive in a particular situation? Once again, just as a little bit of a strategy for not taking yourself so seriously, not seeing the world as revolving around you continuously. And so what we're trying not to do is to continually categorize, classify, compile a dossier about someone or ourselves. And so this is about non-fabrication, about softening our views. And there's a phrase I think I'd like to repeat, softening your views, because yes, views are, the Buddha said we have a thicket of views. Now, a thicket in the wood, all the branches are all tangled together. But we're not going to cut them off at the root immediately. That's maybe where we're headed. But what we can do is become more aware, and that awareness, that clarity of mind is what will help us soften the views. And looking at people not through our personal filters. And, as I said, relying on labels. And also, this doesn't mean shutting yourself off from others. And when we can sort of put down some of this labeling, view-oriented tendency, we can be more available for others as well as ourselves. And also understanding with friendships are really distracting, right? People don't necessarily have to reciprocate. It's something I have a lot of problems with. But just because you like somebody, you want to talk to them, you want to be friends with them, doesn't mean that they're going to feel that way. And it could be personal, but it may have absolutely nothing to do with you. It may have something to do with time. So it's really about not demanding from others, imposing expectations. And I'll use one. So I know Zag has been waiting to try to perform here. So one thing that's really important to understand is about why we think things arise. We think it's about our will. So if I tell Zag to raise his right hand, I don't want him. No, come on, cooperate for once in your life. So look, he's raising his right hand. And then the question comes out, why did that happen? What was the cause of his rising? And of course, he looks at me and says, "You told me." But that's not actually, first of all, I happen to be somewhat operative in this, believe it or not. I know he looks like he's autonomous. But the reason that he could raise his hand, thank you, or I could, right, is not because I willed it. Many other functions. If there wasn't air in the room, I could not raise my hand. If there wasn't space, if I was in a little room, I couldn't raise my hand. If I didn't know English and I didn't know what the phrase raise your hand was, I couldn't raise my hand. And I could go on like this for a long time. And this idea of seeing the multiplicity of causality is really, really important in looking at these slogans and seeing how they help us unbuckle ourselves from our really tight views and our constricted way of seeing the world, that causes and conditions are operative all the time and with us, and we are part of them, and we are part of the change. Be the change you want to see. Well, that's something we can do when we start to work with these things. And then another, from the emptiness point of view, we don't want to figure out people because there's nothing to figure out, right? The labels, the assessments that we might come up with about other people would be just products of our mind, whereas we can be in the moment and do what is appropriate. Because we really like to think that we understand the world, right? And, we think that we have a perch that we can look down and see exactly what's going on. And of course, in these turbulent times with political divisiveness, that kind of feeling gets more and more reinforced. And reason I'm bringing that up is just so we can recognize these things arising. And it doesn't mean that we're impotent, we can't do the things that we'd like to do, but we don't want to destroy ourselves in the process of being upset. And so rather than this question of like, how am I doing? How was I? How am I now? It's more a question of what am I doing? Why am I doing it? So that kind of a question also moves away from self-centeredness. And one thing, Kentrel Lodrontaya says this, I love this. He said, we could have a flaw the size of a mountain in ourselves and not notice, but notice the pea-sized affliction in another person. And I think that's really true. When we focus on what's wrong with others and we sort of take ourselves out of the picture, and and that our pride makes us think we're better than other people's, and then another point very interesting is that when Shakyamuni was alive, he was slandered. Now, how clever was that? And how inaccurate. So once again, we look at our habitual tendencies and just replace this habit with seeing the good in others and mind our own business. So this is this is the last one. All right, so let me just see. Okay, so what I'll just do is sum up. So today we talked about the discipline of relationships, and we talked about 4 things, which was first the 3-part thing of commitment, and our vows, not doing anything outrageous and having patience. And then the second one was to not be a phony, be your authentic self, and then not talking about injured limbs, not getting into what we think about other people. And this last one, which I was talking about, and I might not have actually announced the name of it, this number 26, but this is what I was really talking about, which was don't try to figure others out. Right? And this one really bleeds very easily into the last one of injured limbs. It's really about a preoccupation, a baseless preoccupation with others and ignorance of our own motivation. So it's a lot. I understand. We covered a lot, but I think these things are really, really important. So I want to thank you all for listening and sharing the Dharma with me. And so I guess we have some time for questions. Yeah, Bob.
Thank you, Harry. What does Lojong mean?
Lojong means mind training.
Mind training.
And that to me is what Chan is. Really.
Yeah.
Chan is, meditation.
Sounds redundant.
Yes, it comes from the Department of Redundancy Department.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. Are we clear now? Okay. So, the last vow. Thank you for your help. Thank you for your service and your practice. Okay.